You know how people say life can get a bit monotonous? Well, let me tell you, they're not kidding. It's like you wake up one day and bam, you're 33, with a decade of marriage under your belt and a couple of kids who are your world. But then, there's this gnawing feeling, like a tiny hole in your favorite sweater that keeps getting bigger. That's where my story starts. I'm not your typical protagonist with a dramatic life story. I'm just me, a regular woman with a regular job in a regular town. I work 9 to 5, pick up groceries, make dinner, help with homework. You get the drill. My husband? He's a good man, really. Works his butt off, but that's the problem. He's always working, especially in the evenings. Our schedules are like two ships passing in the night. We're together, but not really together. The loneliness crept up on me slowly. It wasn't just missing my husband, it was missing something. Connection. Excitement, heck, even just adult conversation that wasn't about bills or what's for dinner. So, what do you do when you're lonely? Some people might read a book or binge watch shows. Me, I did something I never thought I'd do. I signed up for a dating site. Yeah, one of those sites, but for people like me, married and not looking to change that, just looking. I can almost hear you judging, but hold on. It wasn't like I dove into this head first. It was more like dipping a toe in the water. Curiosity. I just wanted to see what was out there, what I was missing. And for a while, it was innocent. Just browsing profiles, seeing other people in the same boat. It was comforting in a way. But then he messaged me. Let's call him Mr. X. He was 27, married too, and just like me, he wasn't looking to upend his life. He just wanted more. Our chats were casual at first. I'd log on after the kids were in bed, and we'd talk about everything and nothing. Movies, music, our dreams, our frustrations. It was easy, like talking to an old friend. Then we exchanged numbers. Texting turned into calls, and before I knew it, I was waiting for his messages, his calls. It was like a drug. I'd feel this rush every time my phone buzzed. We'd talk for hours, late into the night, when the house was quiet and I felt more alone than ever. We had this connection. It was undeniable. We got each other in a way that felt both exciting and terrifying. The more we talked, the more I wanted to meet him. It was like a craving I couldn't ignore. We set rules: never leave our spouses, keep this our little secret, just two people finding some happiness in this crazy world. I know, it sounds cliche, but at that moment, it felt real, necessary even. So, we planned to meet. I was a bundle of nerves. What if he wasn't what I expected? What if I wasn't what he expected? I remember standing in front of my mirror, second-guessing my outfit, my hair, my everything. But when I finally saw him, it was like all those doubts just melted away. He was everything he seemed online and more. We met at this quiet little coffee shop downtown, the kind where you can sit in a corner and nobody pays you any mind. He walked in, and I swear, my heart skipped a beat. He had this easy smile, the kind that makes you feel like you've known someone forever. And when we talked, it was like we'd been doing this for years. The conversation just flowed, no awkward pauses, no searching for what to say next. It was natural, comfortable, and thrilling all at once. As we sat there, sipping our coffees, I realized something. I wasn't just attracted to him physically, it was more than that. We connected on a level one hadn't experienced in years. He got my jokes, shared his dreams, and listened, really listened, to what I had to say. It's funny how you don't realize what you're missing until you find it again. But then reality hit me. I was a married woman, a mother, sitting across from another woman's husband, feeling things I hadn't felt in a long time. The guilt crept in, but so did the excitement. It was like being on a roller coaster, thrilling and terrifying all at once. We kept seeing each other after that first meeting. It was like we were in our little bubble when we were together. The world outside didn't matter. We'd meet whenever we could sneak away, always careful, always mindful of the lives we were leading outside of our secret rendezvous. Sexually, we were like two puzzle pieces that fit perfectly. It was passionate, intense, and liberating. I'd forgotten what it was like to be wanted in that way, to feel desire. He made me laugh, made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. But every time we said goodbye, a part of me felt sad, empty. It was like coming down from a high, knowing you can't stay in that euphoria forever. I knew what we were doing was wrong. I'd never been unfaithful before, never even thought about it. But here I was, in the middle of an affair, with someone who wasn't my husband. I'd tell myself it was just physical, just a fling. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I was developing feelings for Mr. X, real, strong, scary feelings. So, there I was, caught in this whirlwind of emotion, trying to juggle my secret life with my real life. Every time I looked at my husband, I felt this pang of guilt. He hadn't changed. He was still the man I married. But I had changed. I was doing something I never thought I would, and it was tearing me up inside. But I couldn't stop. I was addicted to the way Mr. X made me feel, to the escape he provided from my everyday life. It was like I was living in two worlds, and I couldn't let go of either. So, there I was, deep in something I never saw coming. Funny how life throws you these curveballs, huh? One minute you're this married, responsible adult, and the next, you're sneaking around like a teenager. The thing with Mr. X wasn't just a one-off thing, it became our little escape from reality. Every chance we got, we'd meet. Sometimes it was just for coffee, other times, well, you know. It was like we were in our own little world when we were together. The conversation, the laughter, the sex, it was all so intense, so real. But with every meeting, the stakes got higher. We were playing with fire, and we both knew it. We had our rules. Never leave our spouses, keep it secret, but rules don't stop feelings, do they? And boy, were there feelings. I'd find myself waiting for his texts, getting butterflies when his name popped up on my phone. And when we couldn't meet, I felt this ache, like something was missing. It's crazy how someone can become such a big part of your life so quickly. And then there was my husband. He was still there, still working hard, still the good guy the first married. But it was like I was living a double life. With him, I played the part of the loving wife, the caring mother. But when I was with Mr. X, I was someone else, someone more alive, more vibrant. I know it sounds awful, but it's the truth. The guilt was there, always lurking in the background. I'd look at my husband and kids and feel this pang in my heart. What was I doing? Why was I risking everything for this affair? But then I'd see Mr. X, and all those doubts would just vanish. It's like I was addicted to the way he made me feel, and I couldn't give that up. One night, we got close to getting caught. My husband almost read a text from Mr. X. My heart stopped, I swear. I managed to brush it off, make up some excuse, but it was a wake-up call. We had to be more careful. We couldn't let this thing we had ruin our lives. But careful or not, things were getting complicated. It wasn't just physical anymore. We were sharing parts of ourselves, our hopes, our fears. I found out Mr. X wasn't just some guy looking for a fling. He had his own set of problems, his own unhappy marriage. We were two lost souls finding comfort in each other. One day, he told me he was falling for me. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Falling for me? What did that even mean in our situation? We were both married, both had lives and families. There was no future for us, no happy ending. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was real life, and in real life, things get messy. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me was terrified. This was getting too deep, too serious. But another part of me was thrilled. It meant something, didn't it, to have someone care about you that much? I started to look at my husband differently. We'd been together so long, it was like I stopped seeing him. But now, I started to really notice him. The way he'd play with the kids, the way he'd look at me across the dinner table. I realized I still cared about him, maybe even loved him. But it was different from what I felt for Mr. X. It was more comfortable, more familiar, less exciting. The affair continued, but the thrill was starting to fade, replaced by this constant fear of getting caught, this nagging guilt that wouldn't go away. Every time I lied to my husband, every time I snuck out to meet Mr. X, it weighed on me. I was stuck between two worlds, and it was exhausting. One evening, Mr. X and I had a talk. We knew this couldn't go on forever. We were risking too much, hurting too many people. But the thought of ending it, of never seeing him again, was unbearable. So, we made a decision. We'd continue seeing each other, but we'd be more careful, more mindful of the risks. We promised it would just be about us, about the connection we had. No future plans, no false hopes. Just two people finding some happiness in a messed up situation. But promises are easy to make and hard to keep. As the affair went on, the lines started to blur. What started as an escape from loneliness had turned into something complex, something dangerous. I was in deeper than I ever intended, and I didn't know how to get out. If you think affairs are all secret texts and steamy meetups, think again. It's like you're constantly on a tightrope, balancing what you want with what you're supposed to be. And let me tell you, it's exhausting. Mr. X and I, we were in deep. Every stolen moment we had was electric, but it was the moments in between that were killing me. You see, when you're juggling a secret like this, every little thing feels like a potential disaster. Take my husband, for example. He started noticing little changes. Why wouldn't he? I was distracted, on edge. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped. I could see the questions in his eyes, but he never asked. Not outright, anyway. Maybe he didn't want to know the answers. Maybe I was good at making excuses. Either way, it was this unspoken thing between us, a cloud hanging over our marriage. With Mr. X, it was different. We were in our bubble, a world where we didn't have to worry about responsibilities or consequences. But even that wasn't simple. The more time we spent together, the more I realized this wasn't just a fling. I was catching feelings, and that was dangerous. You don't dive into an affair expecting to fall for the other person. But there I was, falling and hard. One night, it hit me. We were lying there, in some cheap hotel room, and he was talking about his life, his wife. And I thought, what are we doing? We're not just messing up our lives. We're messing up theirs too. It was like a slap in the face, a wake-up call. What, did I end it there? No. I was too far gone. It wasn't just about the sex anymore. We'd talk for hours, about everything and nothing. He understood me in a way no one else did. And I think I did the same for him. It was like we were two pieces of the same puzzle, fitting together just right. But with every secret rendezvous, every lie I told, the guilt was building up. It was like this heavy weight I was carrying around all the time. I'd look at my kids, their innocent faces, and feel like the worst person in the world. They deserved a mother who was present, not one who was sneaking around, living a lie. And then there was this one day, this one moment that changed everything. I was at the grocery store, just doing my usual shopping, and I ran into someone I knew. She was asking about my family, how things were going, the usual small talk. But then she said something about how lucky I was, how my husband and I seemed to have the perfect marriage. It was like a punch to the gut, if only she knew. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything. My husband, my kids, Mr. X. What was I doing to all of us? This wasn't a game, it was our lives. And I was messing it all up. I started to pull away from Mr. X, but it wasn't easy. He could sense something was wrong, and we had this big, emotional confrontation. It was messy, full of tears and things we couldn't take back. He asked me what I wanted, and the truth was, I didn't know. I wanted him, but I also wanted my family. I wanted everything to be okay, but I knew it couldn't be. Not like this. Things with my husband were strained, too. It was like we were living together, but we weren't really together. We were like roommates, co-parenting and sharing a house, but not much else. The connection we used to have was gone, buried under layers of lies and secrets. So, there I was, stuck between two men, two lives. With Mr. X, I felt alive, desired, understood. But with my husband, there was history, a family, a life we'd built together. It was like I was at a crossroads, and I had no idea which way to go. The affair was at its height, but so was the turmoil. I was being torn in different directions, and I knew I couldn't keep it up. Something had to give. I had to make a choice, but the thought of choosing was terrifying. That's the thing about affairs. They start as this exciting escape from reality, but they quickly turn into a trap, one where every choice seems impossible, every step feels like a mistake. And I was right in the middle of it, trying to figure out how to fix the mess I'd made. Life's funny, you know. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, it throws a curveball that knocks you off your feet. And let me tell you, I was about to face one hell of a curveball. The affair with Mr. X was like a house of cards, fragile and ready to collapse at any moment. And collapse it did, in a way I never saw coming. It all started with this unexpected twist, something that changed everything. I was at work, just a regular day, you know? Then I get this call from Mr. X. He sounded off, like something was really wrong. Turns out, his wife had found out. Not about me, specifically, but she knew he was up to something. The way he talked, all panicked and desperate, it was like a bucket of cold water over my head. This wasn't a game. We were playing with people's lives, real lives. I remember hanging up and just sitting there, feeling like the worst person in the world. How did I get here? How did I become this person who lies, cheats, and hurts the people she loves? It was like I was waking up from a dream, a really bad one. Then came the confrontation with my lover. We met up, and it was tense, full of anger and accusations. He was scared, I was scared, and for the first time, we were truly honest with each other. We talked about ending it, about how we couldn't keep doing this to our families. But even as we said it, I could feel the pull, the connection that wasn't just going to disappear. Around the same time, something was happening in my marriage. My husband, who'd been distant and busy for so long, started changing. It was like he sensed he was losing me. He began making an effort, coming home earlier, trying to reconnect. It was sweet, in a way, but also heartbreaking. Where was this man when I needed him most? One evening, he sat me down and asked me point blank if I was happy. It wasn't an accusation, more like a genuine, concerned question. I didn't know what to say. The truth, a lie? I ended up saying something vague, but it hung in the air between us, this big, unsaid truth. I was at a crossroads. On one side, there was Mr. X, passion, excitement, something that felt like love. On the other, my husband, stability, history, my family. I knew I had to choose, but how do you choose when each option feels like losing something vital? The decision to end the affair wasn't easy. It came after a lot of tears, a lot of soul searching. I met Mr. X for what we both knew would be the last time. It was emotional, saying goodbye to someone who'd become such a big part of my life. We didn't end it with anger or accusations, just a sad acceptance that this was the right thing to do. Walking away from that hotel room was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I felt like I was leaving a part of myself behind, but I also knew it was time to face the music, to try and fix the life I'd nearly destroyed. Coming clean to my husband was the next step. I didn't tell him everything, just that I'd been unhappy, that I felt we'd drifted apart. It was a half-truth, but it was all I could give him. To my surprise, he listened. He really listened, and for the first time in a long time, we talked. Really talked. We decided to give our marriage another shot. It wasn't going to be easy, fixing something that had been broken for so long. But we both wanted to try, for us, for our kids. So, that's chapter 4. The affair ends, my marriage hangs by a thread, and I'm left trying to piece together the remnants of my life. It's not a happy ending, not yet. But it's a start, a chance to make things right. And sometimes, that's all you can ask for. You ever have one of those moments where everything just feels broken? That was me, after ending things with Mr. X. It's like I was walking around in a daze, trying to figure out what comes next. Ending the affair was hard, but what came after was even harder. There I was, back in my real life, but it didn't feel real anymore. Everything was off, like I was living in someone else's story. My husband and I, we were trying, really trying. He was being so damn understanding, which almost made it worse. I kept waiting for him to yell, to blame me, to do something. But he just didn't. We went to couples therapy, started having date nights again, the whole deal. It was awkward, like we were two strangers learning to be together again. And then there were the nights. The long, lonely nights where I'd lie awake, missing Mr. X. I'd think about calling him, just to hear his voice, but I never did. I'd made my choice, and I had to stick to it. But man, it hurt. It hurt like hell. During the day, I was mom, the wife, the woman who had her life together. But inside, I was a mess. I felt like I'd lost a part of myself, a part one wasn't sure I could get back. My kids, bless them, they were my saving grace. They didn't know anything, of course. To them, mom was just mom. But they kept me grounded, kept me focused on the here and now. As for my husband, we were slowly getting back to something that resembled normal. It wasn't the same as before, couldn't be. Too much had changed, but we were talking, really talking, and that was something. One day, I ran into an old friend, someone I hadn't seen since before the affair. She commented on how happy I looked, how everything seemed to be going great for me. I just nodded and smiled, but inside, I was screaming. If only she knew. Reflecting on everything, I realized I'd been searching for something in Mr. X that I should have been searching for in myself. I wanted excitement, passion, something to break the monotony of my life. But I was looking in the wrong places. Ending the affair didn't magically fix everything. If anything, it opened up a whole new set of problems. But it also opened my eyes. I started seeing a therapist, just for me this time. It was hard, facing up to what I'd done, the choices I'd made. But it was necessary. Through therapy, I began to understand why I'd had the affair in the first place. It wasn't just about feeling lonely or neglected. It was about me, about how I saw myself, how I'd lost myself in the role of wife and mother. I started doing things just for me. I took up painting, something I'd always wanted to try. I started reading again, losing myself in stories that had nothing to do with my life. It was like I was finding pieces of myself I didn't even know were missing. My husband noticed the changes. He'd comment on my paintings, encourage me to take time for myself. It was weird, this new dynamic between us. But it was good, too. It felt like we were building something new, something stronger. As for Mr. X, I thought about him less and less as time went on. He'd always be a part of my story, a chapter I'd never forget. But that's all it was, a chapter, not the whole book. So, that's chapter 5. It's about ending, but it's also about beginning. Beginning to heal, to understand, to rebuild. It's not an easy chapter, but it's an important one. Because sometimes you have to break everything down to start building it back up again. Life after an affair is like walking on a tightrope without a safety net. Every step is uncertain. Every breath is a reminder of the fall you just took. But you keep walking because what else can you do? My husband and I, we were finding our way back to each other, but it was like learning to dance to a completely new tune. Sometimes we stepped on each other's toes. Sometimes we moved in perfect harmony. But we were dancing again, and that mattered. There were moments, fleeting moments, when I saw glimpses of the man I fell in love with. And in those moments, I remembered why I chose to stay, why I chose to fight for our marriage. It wasn't just about the kids or the years we'd spent together. It was about us, about the life we'd built and the future we still could have. But the shadows of the affair lingered. There were times when I caught a certain look in my husband's eyes, a look that said he remembered, that he hadn't forgotten. And in those moments, I felt the weight of my choices, the impact of my actions. I had to learn to forgive myself, which was perhaps the hardest part of all. I'd made a mistake, a big one. But I was more than that mistake. I was a wife, a mother, a woman who'd lost her way but was finding it back. Slowly, the pieces of my life started falling back into place. Not the same picture as before, but maybe a better one. A picture with more honesty, more understanding, more of me in it. I won't say I don't think about Mr. X anymore. Sometimes, when I'm alone, my mind wanders back to him, to us. But it's not with longing or regret. It's more like remembering a dream that was beautiful and painful in equal measure. So here I am, at the end of this chapter, standing on firmer ground than before. My marriage isn't perfect, but it's real. My life isn't exciting, but it's mine. And me? I'm still learning, still growing, still healing. But I'm getting there, one step at a time. And that's the thing about life. It doesn't give you neat endings or simple solutions. It gives you messes, challenges, and the chance to find something beautiful in the chaos. And that's exactly what I'm doing. Finding beauty, finding peace. When I got home, I heard unfamiliar voices coming from the basement. I listened carefully and heard my husband talking to a woman. Hey, can we be together until late tonight? Yeah. My wife is out until tonight, so relax. Let's enjoy our time together slowly. My husband was talking in a mushy voice. He was cheating on me, without my knowing. Blood rushed to my head, and I wanted to rush in right away, but I calmed down. Even if I went now, I would only catch them in the act. I planned to make them taste hell. My name is Kate Miller. I'm currently 40 and working as an office clerk for a stationery manufacturer. I married my husband, Keith, 5 years ago, but we promised to live together as a childless couple due to our age. Since then, we've been living together happily, but lately, we've stopped seeing each other as members of the opposite sex. Before, I used to be embarrassed to show my face without makeup in front of Keith, but as the years went by, I became able to walk around without any shame. Keith, like me, got used to it, and although he used to exercise if he gained even a little weight because he didn't want to be thought of as sloppy, he eventually stopped caring about his appearance. Now, he has a beer belly and fat resting above his belt. You've gained weight recently. Shouldn't you exercise for your health? Huh. Oh, yeah. I will sometime. Keith was lying on the sofa, engrossed in his cell phone. He often gave me half-hearted answers when I spoke to him. Were we both going to forget about caring for each other and grow old in this degenerate life? I wondered. Then one day, Keith suddenly became interested in fashion. On his day off, he bought a bunch of clothes and put on a fashion show in front of the mirror. He was in a good mood, even humming a tune. I thought it was strange to see Keith so happy. I was suspicious of him suddenly becoming interested in fashion, so I asked. You used to say cheap clothes were enough. What's changed? Noticing me, Keith answered while folding the clothes he had spread out. Oh, I just thought I should take care of my appearance now that I'm getting older. With that, Keith took his clothes to his room. I was strangely happy that Keith had become fashionable. It reminded me of how cool Keith was before we got married. I thought I'd follow Keith's lead and buy some nice makeup to make him fall in love with me again. It felt like we were back in our newlywed days, and I made dinner a little more luxurious. Keith also seemed happy when he saw my appearance and the food, and he asked, "What's today? Is it some kind of anniversary?" No. You became fashionable, and it reminded me of our early days, so I got a little carried away. I said, blushing, and Keith smiled happily. Oh, is that it? I'm happy to have such a lavish dinner for the first time in a while. Let's eat. Keith ate heartily and finished everything. I was glad I had made the effort to cook, watching him eat. The next day, a colleague called out to me at work. "Mrs. Miller, I saw your husband outside yesterday, and he seemed to be having a great time walking around." Mrs. Young, my coworker, nudged my arm and said with a grin, "Did you see? He woke up to fashion recently, and he bought a ton of clothes yesterday, so I was surprised." I said, and Mrs. Young's eyes widened. Eh, didn't you go shopping with him?" "No, I was home yesterday." I denied it, and I felt something was off. Mrs. Young then told me what she remembered seeing yesterday. "I'm sure I saw someone yesterday at noon who looked just like Mrs. Yu, with the same height and build, and similar hairstyle and clothes, next to your husband. But I only saw them inside a store, so it might have been a store clerk." Mrs. Young said that, thinking it was a misunderstanding on her part. I was a bit flustered, but I thought it was definitely a store clerk. Keith wouldn't do something like that, I thought. It must have been a store clerk. Don't scare me like that first thing in the morning. You woke me up all at once. I brushed off Mrs. Young's misunderstanding by laughing it off. I was chatting with Mrs. Young until work started when I got an email. It was about the possibility of participating in next month's company trip. I marked my participation and promised to go with Mrs. Young. Then it became evening as I was working, and I went home after stopping by the supermarket. When I entered the room, Keith was in the kitchen, rustling around. Since he never cooks even when he comes home earlier than me, I was suspicious. "I'm home. What are you doing?" When I called out, Keith was a little surprised, but soon moved away from the kitchen. "Oh, welcome back. I was just thirsty, so I was looking for some tea," Keith explained, but he was searching in a spice rack where there should have been neither a cup nor tea. "That's the spice rack. You know that the tea is in the fridge, don't you?" I said, as I took out the tea and handed it to Keith. I was astonished at Keith, who didn't even know where the tea was. Keith took it with a laugh as if it were someone else's business and slouched around in the living room. I cooked dinner for Keith like that, and while eating together, I talked about what happened at the company today. Speaking of which, I'm going on a company trip next month. I'll also finish shopping for the trip with my colleague, Mrs. Young, next Saturday. Oh, got it. Have fun. Then, I remembered the story that Mrs. Young saw Keith. Oh. Speaking of which, Mrs. Young saw you yesterday. She thought we were on a date because someone who looked like me was next to you. She saw you in a clothing store, but you were the salesperson, right? I said, looking cautiously at Keith. Keith also nodded and spoke. Yeah. I had the salesperson put together a coordination that suited me. I requested clothes that wouldn't look strange next to you since the salesperson looked just like you. I was delighted by Keith's words, thinking of me. Since I thought we were going to live together like family, with no more dates, I got excited about being able to date, holding hands like when we were newlyweds. I completely forgot my uneasy feelings about Keith and finished eating happily. And for a few weeks, I spent peaceful days until it became Friday night. I'll go shopping for the trip with Mrs. Young tomorrow. I'll probably eat dinner too, so I might not get back until after 11 p.m. When I told Keith that I was going out tomorrow, he closed his phone and asked, "Got it. Have fun. Where are you gonna be, by the way?" Um, I think I'll be at the big department store 3 stations away. All right. Don't worry about the time. Just enjoy yourself. If it gets late, I'll come and pick you up. Keith was worried about me coming back. Recently, Keith has been worryingly kind and caring, and I thanked him with a not entirely displeased tone. Saturday morning came, and I went out early. I wanted to buy my summer clothes before meeting Mrs. Young. I spent a lot of time trying on clothes, and I didn't want to bother Mrs. Young, so I went early to choose and buy them alone. I ended up with more bags than planned, and I still had 2 hours left before Mrs. Young would arrive. I looked for a locker to leave my bags in, but there were no vacancies. I had plenty of time, so I thought I'd go home and drop it off. As I was walking down the street near my home, I saw a woman wearing a dress from my favorite brand. It was the very dress I had been wondering whether to buy. Her hairstyle and figure were similar to mine, and as I was watching, thinking I might buy it, the woman stopped right in front of my house. At that moment, I hid behind a utility pole to watch without being seen. As expected, Keith opened the front door and, after looking around, beckoned the woman into the house. Suspicion growing, I decided not to enter through the front door and quietly entered through the kitchen's back door. Then I heard the voices of Keith and the woman from the living room. "Can we be together until tonight?" "Yeah. My wife is going out to have dinner with her friends, so we can spend time together until around 10 p.m., Keith reassured the woman, saying that I wouldn't be there until night. "I'm so happy. Last time you left just after shopping, and I was lonely." Sorry. That day my wife was at home, and I would have looked suspicious if I'd been out late. I could hear Keith's voice, responding sweetly to the woman's cutesy tone. I felt a chill in that moment. I realized that the person Mrs. Young saw last time wasn't a store clerk, but this mistress. The thought that Keith had been taking such care with his appearance for this woman made me angry. "Hey, did you look for the spices? If you didn't, I can't make a delicious meal, you know. I looked for them last time. I'll show you while I still remember." With that, their voices grew closer and closer. I was supposed to leave the clothes and leave, but I feared being discovered and instead went out with the bags. I managed to leave the house just in time, without making a sound. I put the bags in the outdoor shed and left the house in frustration, feeling like crying. As I walked, I wondered how long Keith had been cheating. Thinking that all the efforts Keith had made for me recently were actually for that woman made me furious. Feeling irritated, I met up with Mrs. Young. Even while shopping, I couldn't help but wonder when the two of them had started cheating and who the mistress was. Determined to make him confess, I came up with a plan. After dinner with Mrs. Young, I returned home around 10 p.m. He was lounging around the house as if nothing had happened. "Welcome back. Did you have fun?" Keith was behaving so naturally that I thought what I had seen at noon might have been a dream. "Yes, I had a wonderful time." I responded to his lie with a lie of my own. I wouldn't be satisfied unless I trapped him in a way that he couldn't talk his way out of. I thought so and kept Keith in the dark until my plan was perfect. Of course, during that time, I diligently collected evidence like photographs and recorded phone calls. 3 weeks went by, and I was looking forward to the company trip this weekend. By the way, isn't the company trip coming up soon? When does it start and end? Keith asked with a worried look in his eyes, but I knew he was probably planning to bring that woman over. I answered with a look of concern. "It's from Friday morning until Sunday night." "Keith, can you manage to cook and all? You might want to order takeout." "Yeah. I'll try not to make a mess." "I'll miss you, but enjoy your time with your colleagues." I'm sure that at that moment, Keith was secretly celebrating the opportunity to spend time with his mistress. I hoped he would keep playing into my hands without suspecting anything. And then Friday came, and it was the day of the company trip. I was planning to leave the house at 10 a.m., and Keith was leaving for work at 8 a.m., so I would leave later. I took advantage of that time to carry out my plan. After Keith left, I immediately opened his room. I intentionally spilled perfume, filling the room with the scent. Then, I quickly sent Keith an email, telling him that I'd accidentally spilled perfume while cleaning his room and asking him to sleep in the basement from today until Sunday. Keith's room had an inside lock, but the basement had an outside lock. I had utilized the mechanism of the locks. Since I received a reply from Keith agreeing to use the basement, everything seemed to be going according to plan. I looked at Keith's email and then headed straight for the company trip. During the trip, I couldn't relax. My mind was consumed with thoughts of Keith and his mistress, and I found it hard to enjoy myself. Hey, Mrs. Miller. You look pale and you're sweating a lot. I'll tell the boss, why don't you take a break? Mrs. Young, who had been walking with me, looked quite concerned about my condition. I'm sorry, even though I promised to walk with you. I feel sick, so I'm going to leave early. Don't worry about it. The boss was walking over there, so I'll go get him. Mrs. Young ran to the boss and called him over. When the boss saw my condition, he was very concerned and asked if I was feeling unwell. Go back to the hotel, or have your husband come and pick you up. He told me. If Keith came to pick me up, our planned scheme would fail, so I decided to return to the hotel and leave early in the morning. Keith would never think I'd come back on Saturday morning when I said I'd return on Sunday night. I was so excited to imagine Keith's panic-stricken look. When morning came, I apologized to Mrs. Young and my boss and decided to head home early. I took connecting trains and arrived at my nearest station at 9 in the morning. Hoping that Keith and his mistress were still fast asleep, I hurried home. The moment I opened the key to my house, I was sweating so much that it didn't feel like I was opening my own door. With a tension that made me feel like I couldn't make a sound, my heartbeat kept rising. Just when I was going to go to the basement and quietly lock the door, I heard a voice. Keith, wake up. It's already 9 in the morning. I'm hungry. Let's eat breakfast. The mistress had woken up. I was so surprised at the voice that I slipped the luggage I was holding and made a loud noise. I was sweating and panicking, but I decided to change my plan instantly. I'm home. I loudly announced my arrival to Keith. The two were silent and still. They probably didn't expect me to come back, and they must be panicking. After that, I continued to walk around the living room, making loud noises and putting away the luggage from the trip. The two were probably stuck in a situation where they couldn't get out. Then I said loudly, Huh, is Keith out? I pretended to look for Keith. Oh, he might be sleeping in the basement. I said it loudly and slowly approached the basement. I heard a small noise from the basement as if they were desperately looking for a hiding place, and I couldn't help but chuckle. Then I flung the basement door open. Huh, he's not here. Maybe he went out, I said and sharply closed the basement door. At the same time, I casually locked it. The two probably haven't realized the seriousness of being locked in, feeling relieved that they've managed to hide safely. I turned on the TV and listened with the volume up a bit. The weather forecaster reported that today was going to be a hot and humid summer day. I turned on the air conditioner in the living room and enjoyed myself in the cool room. On the other hand, the basement was almost like a storeroom, with no air conditioner or fan. I smiled smugly, wondering how long they could endure. An hour passed. Keith and the woman were still holding on, waiting for me to go somewhere. I looked out the window. The sun was shining, and it was a scorching heat. I vowed not to go outside, so as not to give Keith a chance. As I comfortably watched TV and ate snacks, another hour passed. Then, as if they had reached their limit, I heard Keith's voice. Hey, open up. I sighed and headed to the basement. When I opened the key, a stuffy air flowed from the basement. It's hot. Give me water. Keith went to the living room, sweating and looking exhausted. I peeked into the basement, but the woman was not there, apparently still hiding. Keith drained the water and started yelling at me. You said I could use the basement. Why did you lock it? Keith showered me with curses. I apologized sincerely, but said a little word to shake Keith. I'm sorry. But when I checked the room, nobody was there. Where were you, Keith? Keith couldn't possibly admit that he was hiding in a closet with a woman, so he blabbered on, raising his voice to cover it up. So, what does it matter? It's hot, it's hot. With that, Keith took a bottle of water in hand and went back down to the basement. I figured he must have gone to give the water to the woman hiding there. 5 minutes later, Keith still hadn't returned and commanded me as follows. I feel like I'm gonna faint from the heat. Go buy some ice cream right now. Keith spoke to me condescendingly, pointing his finger. There's ice cream in the fridge, you know. I saw right through Keith's naive strategy. I had anticipated what Keith was likely to say, and I was prepared. Today, let's have pancakes. Yes, pancakes. You don't have the ingredients, do you? Go to the supermarket and buy them right now. Oh, coincidentally, I was planning to make pancakes today. I have all the ingredients, so there's no need to go shopping today. Keith was trying in some way to get me out of the house. I was desperate not to laugh at Keith as he thought frantically. I finally decided to take drastic action, fearing that if he said anything more, it would be something I hadn't anticipated. The smell of perfume must have already disappeared from your room, and you don't need to use the basement. Shall we clean the basement? As I tried to go to the basement, Keith stopped me in a panic. I'll clean it, so it's okay. You've never cleaned anything before, have you? Even though I said that, Keith was desperate to stop me. I feel like cleaning. Leave it to me. He forcibly took the cleaning tools, so I stared at him and said, then clean your own room instead of the basement. You've never even cleaned your own room before. Start with that, not the basement. Keith was momentarily taken aback by the irrefutable words. I took advantage of the opportunity, hurriedly went down to the basement, and opened the door. The woman was sitting in the middle of the basement room, perhaps because the closet was too hot. The moment our eyes met, her face turned pale. Who are you? Of course, I knew she was his mistress, but I pretended not to know. Keith and the woman thought it was their chance, so they lied. This lady is my boss at work. I forgot to bring home some important documents, and she brought them to me. Yes, that's right. I'm Keith's boss. I'm here to help. Keith thought he had cleverly lied his way out of the situation. The woman also clumsily tried to stick to the lie, desperate to maintain the story. It was too sloppy, and I almost laughed. Really? Your boss comes to deliver them on a weekend morning? Normally, wouldn't you go and pick them up? I said that, and Keith started to sweat. Furthermore, I confronted Keith. Besides, if she's just delivering something, she doesn't have to come into the room, right? Even if you wanted to offer her a tea as thanks, you'd lead her to the living room, wouldn't you? It's strange to bring your boss into a room without air conditioning. Keith seemed to regret the lie he had made on the spot. But it's too late to regret now. The woman also just turned blue and hung her head. Since Keith and the woman were just silent, I brought up the subject. You're not his boss, are you? You're his lover, right? When I said that, Keith's shoulders twitched. It was as if he was admitting it. I'm sorry I lied. But really, this is the first time I've done something like this. Please believe me in that. Keith tried to explain. The woman also nodded, in agreement with Keith. I'm not going to fall for such a makeshift excuse. So, the woman who was visiting our house last time was someone else? I said, and Keith let out a loud exclamation in alarm. Did you think you could fool me? I've got evidence of you bringing her here again, and all those phone calls. I've got proof. With that, I handed Keith the business card of the divorce lawyer I had gotten. The woman looked pale throughout the ordeal. Keith was very persistent, and I couldn't refuse him. What? You are the one coming on to me, saying you're better than my wife. What are you playing the victim for? When Keith shouted angrily, the woman fought back. I am the victim, telling me to dress and style my hair like your wife, so your wife and neighbors wouldn't find out. You're so selfish. The woman was also yelling, emotions raw. I stopped their quarreling with a single sentence. The real victim here is me. With that, their argument came to an abrupt halt. I quickly got the woman's address and contact information and sent her home for the day. She played the victim card right to the end. Once alone with me, Keith looked awkward and kept his eyes down. Can you please leave right away? I think the lawyer will be contacting you about the division of assets. After that, Keith left with only his essentials. He's probably going to his parents' house. I had expected this, so the moment Keith left, I called his parents. Mr. Miller, I'm sorry to call so suddenly. Can I talk to you for a bit? I told his parents that Keith's infidelity had caused us to divorce, and they were quite angry. They apologized to me and promised to kick him out even if he came back home. Keith moved exactly as I had predicted. He apparently tried to lie and stay with his parents. I'm home. Uh, we're doing some renovations at the house. Kate went to stay at her parents', so let me stay here too. He shamelessly tried to stay with this lie, but his parents, having heard everything from me, lectured Keith and kicked him out. Keith will be staying in a hotel for a while, and I'm sure his money will run out soon. As I imagined Keith feeling uncomfortable as his address changes and rumors spread after the divorce, I found it funny and couldn't help laughing. I was delighted thinking about Keith's future miserable life. And the woman he cheated with will also be served with a claim for damages for emotional distress, so a few days later, the woman came to my house. Her parents were standing behind her. They said that she wasn't working and couldn't pay the claim, so she had turned to her parents. And her parents, feeling terribly sorry, wanted to apologize in person. The sight of the three of them apologizing at my front door was quite ridiculous. I told the cheating woman this. You can take years if you need to, but you must pay back the money you earn yourself. Don't rely on your parents at all. With that, the woman, who seemed intent on relying on her parents, looked fearful, almost crying. No matter how much she resisted, I couldn't sympathize with her. I thought it served her right. After a while, I received payment from Keith and the woman. I sold the house we were living in and moved to an apartment for one person. I'd never lived alone before, so I was anxious, but it turned out to be comfortable. I didn't want to give up on love because of what happened, so I'm going to start looking for a new relationship. I'm still anxious about falling in love again, but I think I can forget about my ex-husband entirely by finding new love. I've decided to live a life. The moment I saw Alex, something shifted. Standing there, with his back to the morning sun filtering through the office blinds, he was discussing strategies with the team. His confidence was unmistakable, his voice carrying a certain enthusiasm that was hard to ignore. It was just a glance, really, but it lingered longer than it should have. I shook it off, reminding myself I was a married woman, a project manager, not some love-struck teenager. By the time we had our first one-on-one meeting over coffee to discuss the project's direction, my initial intrigue had blossomed into genuine respect for his vision. Alex talked about the project with such passion, it was contagious. You really nailed the presentation last week, Maria. It's clear you've got a solid grip on where we need to head, he said, his eyes locking with mine for a moment longer than necessary. My heart raced at the compliment, a mix of professional pride and something else, something more personal. We found ourselves staying late one evening, the office quiet except for the occasional sound of our voices and the soft tapping on our keyboards. It was supposed to be a session to finalize the project plan, but it quickly turned into something else. Between the discussions of timelines and deliverables, we shared personal stories, laughing over past work blunders and bonding over our mutual love for hiking. It felt easy, comfortable, and dangerously close to crossing a line I hadn't even realized I was approaching. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "Thanks for staying late today. Couldn't have gotten the plans so polished without you." It was a simple message, professional and polite, but it sparked a flurry of exchanges. Casual at first, our texts gradually veered into the personal territory, blurring boundaries with every send but impressed. Our work dinner was the tipping point. What began as a meal to discuss project details evolved into an evening filled with laughter, shared interests, and an undeniable connection. I found myself sharing things with Alex that I hadn't even shared with Tom, my husband, in months. The guilt was there, nagging at the back of my mind, but I pushed it aside, caught up in the moment and the exhilarating feeling of being understood and admired. Walking back to my car that night, the air felt different, charged with an energy I was both excited and scared to acknowledge. I knew I was standing at the precipice of something life-changing, yet the pull towards whatever this was with Alex felt too strong to resist. The rational part of me screamed warnings, but the part of me that craved excitement and connection was louder, drowning out everything else. As I drove home, the streets empty and the city lights a blur, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was hurtling towards an unknown destination at full speed. And the truth was, part of me didn't want to stop. From the moment I stepped into the light of our kitchen, the air felt charged, different. Tom was sitting at the table, a look of concern etched across his face that I hadn't seen in a long time. "You've been coming home late a lot," he started, his voice steady but laced with something that sounded like fear. "Is everything okay at work?" His question, so simple yet loaded, caught me off guard. I forced a smile, brushing off his concern with a rehearsed ease. "Yeah, just the usual project madness. You know how it is." But even as I spoke, I could feel the weight of the lies settling in. The next day, Alex handed me a book, his fingers lingering a moment too long as they brushed against mine. "Thought you'd like this," he said, a knowing look in his eyes. The book was on architectural design, a subject we'd spent hours discussing. It felt personal, a token of the connection growing between us, hidden beneath the guise of work-related enthusiasm. When Tom found the book later, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Where'd you get this?" he asked, turning it over in his hands. Panic fluttered in my chest as I lied. "Oh, a colleague lent it to me. Said it was a good read." I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes, but he didn't push further. That night, I lay awake, the gap between us and our bed feeling like a chasm. The tension broke on the night of our project's successful launch. Alex and I found ourselves alone, celebrating over drinks. The air was electric with our triumph and something more, something unspoken. When he leaned in to kiss me, it felt inevitable, like all the moments leading up to this had been a countdown to the inevitable collision of our lips. The thrill of it consumed me, drowning out the quiet voice of guilt whispering in the back of my mind. But the guilt was there, a shadow trailing behind the moments of exhilaration. It reared its head in the quiet moments, in the pauses between Alex's messages that had become my lifeline. I found myself hiding my phone from Tom, the lies building like a wall between us. Tom's voice broke through my fog of denial one evening as we sat across from each other, an ocean of unsaid words between us. "We're drifting apart," he said, his voice breaking. "I feel like I'm losing you." I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap with truths and confessions, but fear held me back. "We're fine, Tom. Just a rough patch, that's all," I said, my voice hollow, the reassurance as much for me as for him. With each day, the secret grew, a living thing between Alex and me, pulling us further into its gravity. And as it did, the life I had built with Tom, built on years of love and shared dreams, seemed to drift further away, leaving me caught between the thrill of the new and the comfort of the old, unsure of where I belonged anymore. I never thought a simple cup of coffee could feel like a grenade with the pin pulled out. But there we were, Alex and I, laughing over lattes in that cozy cafe corner when the door chimed and my world tilted on its axis. Tom, my husband, the man I shared a life with, walked in. The look on his face when he saw us together, it was a mix of confusion, hurt, and something else I couldn't quite place. Maria, what's going on? His voice was calm, too calm. I scrambled for an explanation that sounded like the truth but wasn't. Oh, hey, we're just discussing the new project timeline. Grab a coffee, join us. The lie tasted bitter. The cafe encounter was just the beginning. A few days later, Tom confronted me with my phone in hand, his expression dark and stormy. Who's Alex? He asked, voice tight with barely contained anger. The screen displayed a string of texts from Alex, ones I thought I had deleted, ones that no doubt crossed lines. He's just a colleague, I stammered, trying to downplay the obvious. We're friends, that's all. But the look in Tom's eyes told me he didn't buy it, not for a second. Then came the ultimatum, a word I never thought would find its way into our marriage. It's him or me, Maria. You decide. The weight of those words hung between us, heavy and suffocating. I promised to end it with Alex, to cut ties and focus on us. But promises, I learned, are as fragile as glass, easily made and easily broken. The weekend away with Alex was supposed to be a secret, a hidden chapter in a book I was writing with someone else. We masked it as a work conference, an excuse dipped in deceit. But when Tom found the hotel receipts, the lie exploded in my face. It was for a work thing, Tom. You're reading too much into this. The denial came easily, too easily, a reflex born of guilt. But Tom, ever the detective, went a step further. I discovered the GPS tracker on my car one afternoon, a silent witness to my lies. The betrayal I felt at his lack of trust was ironic, considering my own. In a moment of weakness, I confided in my friend about the affair. I don't know what to do, I admitted, the words tasting like ash. I'm so lost. Her sympathy was a balm, but her words were a knife. You need to figure it out, Maria. You're playing with fire. Each event, each lie, built a labyrinth around me, one I couldn't navigate. With every step I took, I wandered further into the maze, losing pieces of myself and my marriage along the way. The realization hit me hard, a truth I couldn't escape. I was the architect of my own downfall, crafting a story with no happy ending in sight. The words of my friend echoed in my ears, a warning I chose to ignore. Maria, this is dangerous, she had said, her voice heavy with concern. You could lose everything. But the thrill, the forbidden excitement of being with Alex, overshadowed the voice of reason. I was torn, caught in the middle of a storm I had conjured, unable to step back or move forward. It was during a seemingly innocent moment, hands entwined under the table, that our secret began to unravel. Someone from work spotted us, and by the next day, the whispers had started. The office was abuzz, the rumor mill churning out stories faster than I could deny them. I heard Maria and Alex are a thing. Isn't she married? The question stung, each one a reminder of the web of lies I was tangled in. Denying the rumors became a part of my daily routine, each denial a brick in the wall I was building around myself. It's not true, I'd say, forcing a laugh, trying to appear unfazed. But inside, the pressure was mounting, a constant, gnawing reminder of the reality I was trying to escape. The day Tom showed up at work for a surprise lunch was the day I realized how far I had drifted from the shore. His presence, once a source of comfort, now felt like an intrusion. I thought we could have lunched together, he said, smiling. unaware of the storm raging inside me. The panic was palpable, a thick cloud of fear and guilt. How could I sit across from him, knowing the lies that lay between us? Another work trip with Alex was the nail in the coffin, a decision made in a moment of folly. Tom's suspicion was evident in his eyes, a silent question that demanded an answer I wasn't ready to give. "It's just a conference," I lied, the words tasting like ash. But the lie was thin, transparent, and we both knew it. A colleague pulled me aside one day, her words a lifeline I was too scared to grasp. "Maria, be careful," she cautioned, her eyes filled with a mix of worry and disappointment. "You're risking your career, your reputation." But her words, meant to pull me back from the edge, only pushed me further into the abyss. I was too far gone, too entangled in the lies and the longing. Home became a battlefield, a place of silent dinners and unspoken accusations. The tension was a living, breathing entity, filling the spaces between Tom and me, a constant reminder of the chasm that had formed. We were strangers, sharing a house but not a life, the distance between us growing with each passing day. Caught in a web of my own making, I was losing sight of who I was, who I had been before Alex walked into my life. The excitement had faded, leaving behind a trail of destruction, a life fractured by choices I couldn't undo. The warning signs were there, clear as day, but I had chosen to ignore them, blinded by a passion that was as fleeting as it was fierce. Now, I was paying the price, trapped in a maze of lies and regrets, searching for a way out that didn't exist. The moment I decided to leave Tom for Alex, I thought I was choosing true love over security. It felt like stepping off a cliff, exhilarating and terrifying all at once. "I'm going to be with Alex," I whispered to my reflection, trying on the decision like a new dress, turning it over in my mind, looking for flaws. But when I told Alex, expecting him to sweep me up in a declaration of mutual passion, his hesitation sliced through the fantasy. "Maria, it's complicated. I'm not sure I can leave my situation right now," he stammered, his words a cold bucket of reality dumped over my head. The ground beneath me shifted, the future I had imagined crumbling away. The realization that I had misjudged Alex's intentions was a bitter pill to swallow. I had gambled everything on a mirage, leaving me stranded in no man's land. In desperation, I sought Tom out, hoping to find a bridge back to the life I had so recklessly abandoned. "Tom, can we talk?" "I made a mistake," I said, my voice trembling with the weight of my regret. But the distance in his eyes told me that the chasm between us might be too wide to cross. "I don't know if there's anything left to say." "Maria," he replied, his voice hollow. My discovery of the GPS tracker on my car was the spark that ignited an inferno. Confronting Tom, I demanded answers, only to be faced with the evidence of my deceit laid bare. "How could you not trust me?" I accused, even as I knew the hypocrisy of my words. The argument that followed was a tempest, raw and unyielding. I tried to justify my actions, to make him see that my mistake didn't define me. But Tom was unmoved, his heart hardened against my pleas. The isolation that followed was suffocating. At work, colleagues who once greeted me with smiles now offered only cool nods, their conversations stopping as I approached. The whispers were a constant hum in the background, a soundtrack to my downfall. Then came the ultimatum from Alex, the final nail in the coffin of what I thought we had. "We can't do this anymore, Maria. It's too risky for both of our careers," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth I had once basked in. The professional facade we now had to maintain was a stark reminder of everything I had lost. In the end, I was left to navigate the wreckage of my own making, a ship without a compass in a sea of judgment and regret. The life I had known was gone, replaced by a reality of my own creation. The path back to myself was unclear, every step heavy with the knowledge of what could have been and the harsh truths I had learned too late. The moment I stepped into the office, I could feel it, the weight of whispered judgments, the cold shoulders that turned away as I approached. My professional reputation, once sterling, was now tarnished by rumors and whispers that seemed to echo off the walls. Maria, the one who, I'd catch snippets of conversations that would cut off as soon as I came into view. The realization that my personal choices had bled into my professional life, eroding the respect and position I had worked so hard to build, was a pill too bitter to swallow. Coming home to an empty house only amplified the loneliness. The day Tom moved out, he didn't say much. The silence between us was filled with years of memories and a chasm of betrayal. The space he left behind was palpable, a void that echoed with the remnants of our life together. Every room, every piece of furniture, reminded me of what had been and what I had lost. When the divorce papers arrived, they felt like a formal acknowledgement of my downfall. Tom cited irreconcilable differences, but we both knew the truth. The legal documents didn't just signify the end of our marriage, they were a testament to the destruction my actions had wrought. The financial strain that followed was crippling. The divorce settlement heavily favored Tom, a consequence of my infidelity. I was left to navigate the murky waters of financial insecurity alone, a stark contrast to the stability we had shared. The reality of managing expenses and legal fees on a single income was a challenge I was ill-prepared for. Friends, are those I had thought were friends, sided with Tom. Their withdrawal added layers to my isolation, leaving me to face the aftermath of my choices alone. The social circle we had built together disbanded, aligning with the person they deemed the victim, while I was cast in the role of the pariah. At work, the fallout continued. I was passed over for a promotion I had been eyeing for months. The reason, though not explicitly stated, was clear. The affair had become a distraction, a mark against my professional judgment. My career, once on an upward trajectory, had hit a standstill, a reflection of the chaos my personal life had become. In the solitude of my empty home, I found myself reflecting on the choices that led me to this point. The consequences of my actions were laid bare, a harsh landscape of lost love, friendships, and professional respect. The cost of my pursuit of happiness, or what I had believed to be happiness, was higher than I could have ever imagined. And then, the final cut, Alex moved to another city for a new job, severing the last tie I had to the illusion of a future we might have shared. His departure was a quiet affair, a simple message that left no room for doubt. We were over, not just in the physical sense, but in every way that mattered. The realization that I was truly alone, forced to confront the wreckage of my own making, was a turning point. The path to rebuilding my life was uncertain, fraught with the remnants of broken relationships and a tarnished reputation. Yet, it was a path I knew I had to take. The journey toward redemption and self-forgiveness was the only way forward, a chance to start anew, not in the pursuit of happiness with another, but in finding peace within myself. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but it was mine to walk, a chance to rebuild from the ashes of my downfall. The silence in my apartment was deafening, a stark contrast to the life I once led, filled with laughter, whispered secrets, and the warmth of companionship. Now, it was just me, surrounded by the ghosts of choices past, each room echoing with the loneliness that had become my constant companion. My social circle, once vibrant and inclusive, had dwindled to nothing, leaving me to face the long evenings alone. Work, too, felt like a battlefield, every achievement overshadowed by the whispers and sidelong glances of colleagues who knew too much about my personal failings. Determined to claw my way out of the hole I dug for myself, I threw myself into my job and sought solace in personal growth. Books on self-improvement and mindfulness became my new best friends, their pages offering advice on how to rebuild a life from the ashes of disaster. I started attending workshops and seminars, anything to fill the void and perhaps find a new direction for my aimless drifting. It was during one of these attempts at starting over that I ran into Tom. Our encounter was accidental, a chance meeting at a mutual friend's art exhibit. He was polite, his greeting cordial, but his eyes were distant, a clear sign that he had moved on from the storm we had weathered together. The cold politeness of his demeanor was a sharp reminder of all that had been lost. His indifference stung, a tangible sign of the emotional chasm that now lay between us. The sight of him, so composed and distant, filled me with a deep, gnawing regret. Memories of our life together played in my mind, a montage of moments both mundane and profound, now tinted with the gray hue of loss. I had hoped for a flicker of warmth, a sign that not all was lost between us, but, faced with his polite detachment, I realized the full extent of the damage my actions had caused. In the aftermath of our encounter, a resolution began to take shape within me. I accepted full responsibility for the choices that led me here, to this moment of profound isolation and regret. The journey to forgiveness, both seeking it and offering it to myself, was fraught with difficulty, but I understood that it was the only way forward. I vowed to learn from my mistakes, to grow beyond the person who had made them, and to build a future that was defined not by regret, but by the lessons learned from it. The new normal that unfolded was one of quiet reflection and slow rebuilding. My social circle may have been irrevocably changed, but I found solace in new friendships, ones that were built on the foundation of who I was becoming, not who I had been. My professional life, too, began to show signs of recovery as I proved through my actions and dedication that I was more than the sum of my past mistakes. The road ahead was not easy, marked by moments of doubt in the lingering shadows of what had been. Yet, with each step forward, I found strength in my resolve to become a better version of myself, one who faced the consequences of her actions with grace and the determination to emerge stronger. The affair and its aftermath were painful lessons in the consequences of our choices, but they were also a catalyst for change, pushing me towards a future where I could look back on this chapter not with endless regret, but with the understanding that from great mistakes come profound opportunities.